Hey everybody, Manga Mike here, and sorry for the delay. Had a lot happen the past few months. Actually, had some stuff happening with the family, but also bought a house. So I'm now in my new house, and I'm ready to start making regular videos. So I am going to have a schedule where I post videos every Wednesday at 5. So I'm excited about that. And in this first series, I'm going to do a series by series basis. I'm going to be going over writing and artwork, but I'm going to be going over how to study different manga and how to take things that you like from them and implement them within your own manga. So, this first video is going to be about the first chapter of your story. And I'm taking two first chapters that I really enjoy, which is the first chapter of Bleach and the first chapter of Full Metal Alchemist. And I'm going to show you how I kind of analyze these first chapters and how I am going to implement those things within my own manga. So let's get started. We're going to look at Bleach's writing portion first. So the first thing that you want to think about a lot is your first page. So when you are doing a first page, you have to do a few things. You have to draw people in, and you also have to somehow introduce your story, right? I think Bleach's first page, if I am going to be honest, is slightly weaker than Full Metal Alchemist, but I do like a few of the things that are done in this first page. I will briefly talk about the art. I know that that's not something that I'm going to do in detail, but I do want to briefly talk about this. This panel right here, I think, is beautiful. It creates a really good sense of mystery. But other than the art, you do get an idea of two things. You get an idea of this person's on a search for something, and you get an idea that there is a power system involved in this shonen manga, right? I sense enormous spirit energy, and she's after that energy, right? So now we have a page turn effect where we want to see, like, okay, what is spirit energy? Like, what's going to happen? And that's something you want to think about with your first page. This next piece, so Ichigo, you spend a lot of time with Ichigo in the first chapter, right? And of course you do, because he's the protagonist. But you also do it in a short period of time, and it feels like there's a lot, right? I would say 9 pages are kind of spent just seeing what kind of person Ichigo is. But there's a lot involved with that. You kind of get, why is he special? He can see ghosts. You kind of get his personality, like he's a kind of kid that is hot-headed, slightly arrogant, but you also see that he has a soft spot, right? And in particular, these first 9 pages, he has a soft spot for this little ghost girl. And those things are important to be able to get across to your readers in a short period of time, right? So I took from that, it's best to have a character that you can exemplify their personality and kind of who they are as a character in a very short period of time. Ichigo is hot-headed. He cares about people. He has somewhat of a soft spot for family and for people who might not be able to defend themselves. Right? That's important. So now I want to go on to this next piece. Right? Oh, sorry. Let me backtrack. And it feels like a lot within 9 pages, but there's 56 pages of this first chapter, and 9 pages of that isn't really that much, but it feels like so much because he has such a strong hold on his character, Ichigo, and he's able to kind of exemplify it in a way that showcases that character. You want to be able to do that with your protagonist or protagonists in that first chapter as well. So this next piece. Now, I think it's funny because Full Metal Alchemist and Bleach do the same kind of thing. There's an info dump in both, right? This is an info dump. No matter how you look at it, it is. But the reason why it's not so bad is because, one, it's just a couple of panels. It's 4 panels. And 2, it's intertwined with humor, right? Which is great. So you get, like, Rukia drawing these goofy little, like, kind of childish drawings to explain what hollows and what holes are. And she also explains what Soul Reapers do in order to kind of bleach the world of the hollows and the holes, and why it's important to do so. And she does it in a way, and Ichigo down here has a mustache. It's very comedic, so that's something you also want to think about. How do I info dump? Because you have to info dump a little bit. It's the first chapter. You have to be able to tell people about your world. But how do I do that in a way that resonates with my viewers? So that's important to think about. And again, I think Bleach does that well. So this other piece, I probably could have put a couple more pages in here to kind of laminate this point even more. But Ichigo, you kind of get a sense that Ichigo is a special person, right? You realize, or Rukia realizes, that it was his power that was kind of clouding her judgment. He sees ghosts. He takes basically all of Rukia's power. He has a huge sword, and she says, like, oh my gosh, his Zanpakuto, and pause. She's like, it's so huge, right? And that is obviously, like, it has some kind of analogy to his spiritual pressure in general. All those things are really important to know. And I think that also, like, his thrust into this role is so beautifully done. Kubo probably sat there and was like, what's the most shocking way I can have this person take this role? What if I have them take the Zanpakuto and shove it through their own body in order to actually perform this ritual of becoming a Soul Reaper? And you see, like, the shock on the face. The facial expressions here are just beautiful. And again, we'll talk about the art at another time, but the shock and then the actual thrusting, and it's just so beautifully done. So that's something you want to think about too. How do I make this like call to action and the burst into the call of action interesting, right? And that's something that you'll want to be able to put into your manga. And I think that this chapter does a great job, too, of having a whole bunch of unanswered questions that you want as the reader to see. And it doesn't do it in a way that, like, makes the first chapter feel incomplete. So it's like, why is Ichigo so special? How long will he be a Soul Reaper for? Why did Rukia lose all of her powers? Will Ichigo continue as a Soul Reaper even after he has saved his family and friends? Will Rukia get her powers back? If she does that mean that Ichigo will lose his? And what happens next, right? And that is what you want your readers to think. What's happening next? Like, I have to read it, right? So being able to kind of provide that kind of pull into your story is extremely important. Now, I do want to point out at least things that I felt I don't want to do in my own manga. I don't think Ichigo has a very clear, like, long-term goal. He has a short-term goal, which is good for, like, well, it's good for his character because his character is very subtle, but it's not good for the longevity of a specific story because now you have to come up with different ways to push the story along. And he ends up being slightly passive as in result of this, right? Which is fine. Like, that was Kubo's decision, right? It's not like he actively decided to give Ichigo less of a goal like Naruto or something like that, right? Which is fine. It's more realistic. But I would argue that it's a little harder to write that way, and you might want to push towards having a goal that's pretty clear. And that's what I'm going to do on my own. I will say his character, we'll talk about this more later on, but like in a nitpicky way, I do think his character could have had a little bit more of a rejection to this call of action. It was slight, but to me, it wasn't push and pull enough. But again, like, that's really nitpicky. And what do I mean by that? Like, he shoved a sword through him, and he kind of did it like he just saw his sister was suffering, which I probably would do the same, but it didn't feel like a true rejection, right? He was put in a circumstance in which he had no means to reject. Kubo could have redone the story and basically had Rukia come to him sensing his enormous spiritual pressure and saying, like, I'm sick or something's been happening to me, I need you to take this. in the very beginning and him saying no, and then have some of this stuff come along and then him saying yes. I mean, that slightly happens, but not to like the stark extent that I'm proposing. So yeah, those are kind of my little nitpicky things. Again, I think it's a great first chapter. I wouldn't change too much about it. All right, so Full Metal Alchemist. This first page blows Bleach's first page out of the water, in my opinion. There's so much happening here. You get like a sense of something was done and it went wrong. Somebody's missing. You also get a sense of kind of the moral of this story, the theme of the story, which is teachings that do not speak of pain have no meaning because humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something in return. That's super important, right? It's so important to be able to give your theme to your readers as quickly as possible because it allows them to make a judgment call pretty quickly on whether or not they're going to want to read. So this kind of first page is like, this is something that I'm going to strive for and probably never really obtain, but I will strive for something like this, and you should too in your comic. How do you make it so shocking that people have to keep reading? All right. This next piece, I do think that so Bleach and Full Metal Alchemist have two different ways of kind of allowing the audience to be in the first chapter. Ichigo is in place of the audience in the first chapter, right? And this, I would argue that the audience is actually in the shoes of the people of this town. So Ed and Alphonse are looking for something. They go into this town. These people don't have too much of a knowledge on what alchemy is, just like us as readers, right? And I think she does a beautiful job of kind of setting this up, especially through the character of Rose. So like Rose, or Rose, I don't know how the name is said, but she is like really kind of lost, and everybody just kind of thinks that this person, Father Cornelio, is doing these things, and it's some kind of miracle, right? So he has like this cult following, and people are kind of just like worshiping this guy, which I could see happening in our world, right? And it's not until Alphonse and Ed kind of come in and question all of this that the people see Father Cornelio for what he really is, which is a fraud. But I think that this is such a well done way of doing exposition, and that's something you have to think about, right? How do I give readers this exposition in a way that not only makes sense, but it's fun and enjoyable to see and go through? And how do I make it subtle enough that this story has this really in-depth, detailed world building? How do I make it subtle enough to not have it be so boring? And again, like you can see, Rose in this particular panel is really in the place of us. She goes in and starts to talk about like the laws that make up her magic system, right? The law of conservation of mass and the law of natural providence, right? And she's like, huh, because that's how that's how we are as readers, right? So she's kind of poking fun at the fact that this is a lot of information, but it's further explained, and then we also get within this same page the goal of the protagonist, right? This guy is doing too much with too little. Big brother, do you think? I think we found it, right? They're looking for something. They're looking for a way to get around this law, right? Or they're looking for people who are trying to get around the law for some reason. So this is super important for us to see, because now we have, in juxtaposition to Ichigo, we have Alphonse and Ed, who have this goal, right? They have a goal in which propels their journey, which I personally think provides a character or a set of characters who are a little easier to follow because they're more active. So that's something you want to think about too in your first chapter. Like, how do I show this character's goal, and how do I push it out in a way that doesn't feel exposition-y, but also feels very exciting, right? And gets my point across. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about with Full Metal Alchemist and Bleach. Now, I will say, Full Metal Alchemist, I do think that understanding the age of your audience is important. This is a lot of information for a young teenager audience, right? I think that Full Metal Alchemist probably suits older teens a little bit more, like 15 plus, than maybe like preteen and teen, like 11 to like 13 or so. Um, because of how in depth this theme is, and how like in depth in general the information and the magic system and all that is, and I guess complex is probably the word I was looking for. But that's something you have to think of too, like who's your target audience, like, and how do I get this information to them in a way that is not dumbing it down and insulting them as the audience, but how in a way that's also not so complex that it doesn't really make sense. So that's one piece of criticism that I have for this first chapter of Full Metal Alchemist. And I guess the only other thing is, I would say, like, I don't have as many questions for Full Metal Alchemist as I did for Bleach, but that's okay. I still think that it was interesting enough to want to like page turn, but that's something I do want to keep in mind with my own manga, and you should also keep that in mind with yours as well. And finally, I do think it's important to point out these two first chapters could almost be standalone stories, and that's how strong you want your first chapter to be. It shouldn't be like, oh, like, well, this story is super incomplete, and I don't like. There's no sense of fulfillment in reading the first chapter. You don't want that. You want it to be something that is fulfilling. You want it to be something that has like a clear-cut beginning, middle, and end, and you want it to have maybe a cliffhanger, but not so much of a cliffhanger that it feels incomplete. So all of those things are super important to think about within your first chapter. But anyways, again, I'm really excited. Hopefully, I can like stick to my schedule and get these things out every Wednesday, like I plan on doing. And I'm really excited to restart everything, and hopefully, barring any crazy life events again, I'll be able to be more consistent. If you liked it, please make sure you leave a like. It helps me out a lot. Screws with YouTube's algorithm. Woo! Um, and also, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It'll help me out greatly. My goal is to be able to hit 1K by the end of the year, and hopefully we get to that. But anyways, I hope you have a great day. And as always, I'm Manga Mike, and I'm out.